Now we are beginning with the interesting stuff. We have already learnt the basics of networking, HTML, JavaScript, PHP, and some other stuff that we require to proceed. So in this lesson, we'll learn about what is OWASP, and from next tutorial onwards, we'll begin with the practicals. Okay, so what is OWASP? It stands for Open Web Application Security Project, and it is a non-profit foundation. It has lot of community-led open source software projects. Like there are many conferences hosted by OWASP to spread knowledge about cybersecurity. There are various open source tools. Now people who are not familiar with open source term, it means that free of cost software. If I have to explain in simplest term, then the code which is available for free, that is known as open source. And yes, OWASP is one of the major organizations when we talk about cybersecurity, and each individual should be familiar with it. Now, what role is played by OWASP when we talk about web application attacks? So, OWASP has laid down top 10 attacks which websites usually have, and this list keeps on updating. So, I'll just explain about them briefly, and in the next tutorial onwards, we'll see the practicals of each one of them. So the very first place in OWASP top 10 is injection. It simply means that you are able to inject your piece of code inside a website. Now imagine that there is a website and you insert your HTML code inside that. So it will be categorized as injection. Now why it is placed at the first place is because there are much more severe vulnerabilities like SQL injection. We will go in depth about that, but just to explain you all for the timing, SQL injection is when you are able to communicate with the database and extract critical data from it by injecting your own SQL payloads inside it. Now when you have critical data like what is the employee's password, etc. So if you are able to extract passwords from a website using SQL injection, it would be categorized in the first category, that is injections. Second category is broken authentication. Now it is fairly easy to understand from the name itself. Broken authentication means that you are able to bypass the authentication somehow. Authentication is basically the login mechanism of a website, and if you are able to bypass that, then that would be considered as broken authentication. Sensitive data exposure. Now these terms are self-explanatory. Sensitive data exposure means that a website displays certain data that it should not have displayed. For example, just a very basic example I'm talking about. Let's say a website displays some internal IP address, a private IP address inside HTML comments. That would be sensitive data exposure. Sometimes it may leak API keys and other stuff that is very critical for the application. Next is the XML external entity. This you will understand once we perform it, but just to give you an understanding, it means that we write our own XML code and the server understands it, interprets it, and provide us the required details that we have asked for. Next is broken access control. It simply means that we are able to access something which we should not. For example, I am a normal user and I am able to access a page which only admins can access. Great, so we have discussed the top 5. Now let's come to the sixth one. Security misconfiguration. So security misconfiguration is self-explanatory, I need not explain it. Next we move to cross-site scripting. Now this is the vulnerability which is found on most of the websites. Like there are advanced payloads or the basic payloads, but websites are usually vulnerable to this particular cross-site scripting attack. It also has further categories, we'll discuss it in the future tutorials. So it means we are able to inject our JavaScript payload, and further we can do a lot of stuff from that, like we can session hijack, steal cookies, and there are a lot of stuff. Next comes insecure deserialization. So it is basically a problem when server deserializes an encoded string, and that encoded string has our malicious payload. So if the server interprets that payload and provides us the required stuff, then that is known as insecure deserialization. Next comes using components with known vulnerabilities. So it is very simple to understand that the website is using some technology which is old, outdated, and vulnerable to already known public exploits. Last comes insufficient logging and monitoring, like websites when they do not track or make proper logs, and monitor other stuff, that is known as insufficient logging and monitoring. So looking at all the vulnerabilities, these are basically the top 10 vulnerabilities that the bug bounty hunters usually see. So if we look at each one of them, basic understanding is that either we are able to inject our payload and get some stuff from the server, or we are seeing something which is confidential and should not be present. So whenever we talk about ethical hacking, bug bounty hunting, it always deals with how much impact we can have on the website in terms of confidentiality. Integrity means that if we can change something or not, which we are not supposed to, or the availability. For example, DOS attack. Like if we perform the DOS attack, we are not able to access the website and it affects the availability. So these three components are very popularly known as CIA: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So as a pen tester, you always have to see that if you are carrying out any attack apart from these 10 also, are you having any impact on C, I, or A? If the answer to any one of them is yes, then go ahead and you can report it. That's it for this tutorial. Thank you.